12,000 years ago, at the end of the Ice Age, a group of hunter-gatherers walked onto a lonely hill in southern Turkey and built something that should have been impossible. They carved towering stone pillars before the invention of farming, engineering, or even pottery. And then, without warning, they buried the entire structure and vanished from history. For decades, archaeologists have tried to explain how a civilization that wasn't supposed to exist created the world's first temple. What they uncovered at Göbekli Tepe doesn't just rewrite history, it raises a question far more unsettling. Where did this knowledge come from? The civilization that shouldn't have existed. The story of Göbekli Tepe begins long before the first cities, long before the first kings, and long before humanity was supposed to be capable of anything remarkable. 12,000 years ago, the world was emerging from the final stages of the Ice Age. Human beings were scattered across the landscape as small groups of nomadic hunter-gatherers. They had no agriculture, no permanent homes, no writing, no metal, and no knowledge of the complex engineering that would later define civilization. According to everything modern archaeologists believed, humans at that time were simple, struggling to survive and far from building anything monumental. And yet, on a lonely hill in southeastern Turkey, something impossible was left behind. Göbekli Tepe, the Belly Hill, a name whispered among archaeologists with equal parts awe and disbelief. Its discovery in the 1990s would challenge the very timeline of human civilization and raise questions that still remain unanswered. How did a people with no cities create the world's first known temple? Why did they build it with stone pillars weighing up to 20 tons each? And why did they deliberately bury the entire complex, hiding it for thousands of years? The story opens with a single man, a Kurdish shepherd walking across a barren hillside near the city of Şanlıurfa. His sheep wandered through uneven ground, kicking at stones that seemed strangely shaped. Some were smooth, others were carved. When he brushed the dirt aside, he saw something unnerving, something crafted, deliberate, and clearly ancient. He alerted nearby authorities, but they assumed it was nothing more than an old Byzantine cemetery. The site was forgotten until German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt arrived. Schmidt recognized the truth instantly. What the shepherd had found was not a cemetery, but the tip of a massive prehistoric structure. As Schmidt surveyed the hill, he realized it was not a natural rise in the earth at all. It was human-made, an artificial mound created by layers of buried stone temples. With every scrape of his trowel, Schmidt uncovered something that should not have existed at that point in time. Towering T-shaped monoliths arranged in perfect circular formations. These stones, some standing over 16 feet tall, were not crude. They were carved with astonishing precision. On their surfaces, Schmidt discovered intricate reliefs of animals: lions, snakes, foxes, boars, vultures, and creatures humans would have feared and worshipped. These carvings were not amateur attempts. They were elegant, refined, and symbolic. Whoever carved them understood art, storytelling, and perhaps even myth. It didn't make sense. Humans of that era were not supposed to think this way. They weren't supposed to build this way. The scientific community soon realized what Schmidt was uncovering: a temple complex older than Stonehenge by 6,000 years, and older than the pyramids by twice that. Göbekli Tepe was constructed around 9600 BCE, before the invention of pottery, before domesticated animals, and before any known village. This was a time when human beings were believed to be primitive nomads, not architects. Someone, somehow, had built the earliest known monumental structure in human history. As excavations continued, the scale of the site grew even more mind-bending. Beneath the surface, Schmidt's team detected dozens of stone circles, each larger and more complex than the last. Only a tiny fraction has been uncovered. Most of Göbekli Tepe remains buried beneath its own deliberate tomb, soil intentionally packed over it by the very people who built it. This mystery alone raised questions that archaeologists still struggle to answer. Why would a society invest enormous labor into creating a sacred complex, only to bury it? Not damage it, not abandon it, but bury it carefully, stone by stone, layer by layer, as if they wanted to preserve it for a future they would never see. The prevailing theory was overturned by Göbekli Tepe's existence. For decades, archaeologists believed that agriculture created civilization. The logic seemed obvious. Once humans began farming, they settled down, formed villages, and created time for religion, art, and architecture. But Göbekli Tepe reversed that logic entirely. Here was a monumental temple built by people who did not farm, Here was religious and architectural sophistication before agriculture. Here was proof that human society became complex first, and only afterward turned to farming to support that complexity. Göbekli Tepe was rewriting human history, not line by line, but chapter by chapter. Yet the mystery only deepened. For a civilization to construct a site of this size, hundreds of people were needed. But hunter-gatherers did not gather in groups that large. They lived in small bands that rarely exceeded 30 or 40 individuals. So how did they coordinate a workforce big enough to move stones weighing tens of thousands of pounds? Some researchers propose that religion came first, that belief, ritual, and shared myth brought humans together in ways survival alone could not. If true, Göbekli Tepe might represent the birthplace of organized religion, humanity's first shared mythic landscape. Others proposed something far darker, that the builders were guided by knowledge that has since been lost, or perhaps inherited from a previous culture, wiped out at the end of the Ice Age, a civilization erased by rising seas and global climate shifts, leaving behind fragments of knowledge too advanced for their time. But whether Göbekli Tepe's builders were innovators or inheritors, one thing was certain: the site was engineered, its circles were aligned, its pillars were arranged with intention, and its carvings of animals, dangerous beasts, and strange humanoid figures suggest a symbolic system far older than any language we know. As Schmidt continued his excavation, he made an observation that chilled him. Göbekli Tepe was not built once. It was rebuilt again and again. New layers were placed over old ones, new circles over older circles, as if generations of people returned to the same sacred spot, guided by a purpose that persisted across centuries. But even more perplexing was what came next: the sudden end. Around 8200 BCE, the people who built Göbekli Tepe buried it completely. The entire complex, massive, sacred, and breathtaking, was entombed with dirt and stone. And then, the builders vanished from history. No trace of their culture appears again. It was as if they stepped into the world long before their time, built something grander than they should have been capable of, and disappeared. The mystery was only beginning. The architects of the impossible. As scholars attempted to understand Göbekli Tepe, they quickly realized that the site did more than disrupt a timeline. It shattered an entire worldview. Every assumption about the origins of civilization had to be rewritten, and yet the greatest mystery was not the stones themselves, but the people who stood behind them. To this day, no one knows who built Göbekli Tepe. They left no written records, no tools, no pottery, no signs of agriculture or domestic life, and no graves. They emerged from the prehistoric shadows, carved monuments of staggering complexity, and then vanished without a trace. Archaeologists often refer to these unknown builders simply as the people of Göbekli Tepe, but that name does not capture the strangeness of what they achieved. To construct even one stone circle, hundreds of individuals would have been needed, but hunter-gatherers didn't live in groups large enough to do that. Their daily lives revolved around survival, not architectural ambition, and yet, at this lonely hilltop, they achieved what even advanced civilizations thousands of years later struggled to accomplish: precision-engineered stone architecture. The pillars at Göbekli Tepe were not just heavy, they were massive, some weighing as much as a fully loaded bus. Moving them would require not only strength, but coordinated effort, planning, and leadership. Researchers tried to answer the obvious question: how could people with no cities, no roads, and no animals of burden move stones this big? The answer remained unclear. Wooden sledges, rope and log systems, sheer manpower, all possible, yet none quite satisfying. Each method required a level of organization and effort unprecedented for that era. But perhaps the more unsettling question was, why? At a time when survival demanded constant movement, these people chose to build something fixed, permanent, and monumental. They chose to carve symbols that would outlive them for millennia. They chose to dedicate unimaginable effort to a place that held meaning beyond survival, meaning that must have been spiritual, mythological, or cosmic in nature. Many archaeologists now believe Göbekli Tepe was not a settlement, but a temple, a sacred gathering place that brought together scattered tribes from across the region. A sanctuary where rituals, myths, and beliefs were carved into stone long before written language emerged. If true, then Göbekli Tepe was more than a temple. It was a turning point in human history, the earliest example of large-scale cooperation. It was a place where humans first unified under shared beliefs, where ritual preceded farming, and where myth laid the foundation for civilization itself. Some researchers suggest an even more disciplined social structure. The carvings at Göbekli Tepe are not random. They follow patterns. Pillars often come in pairs, some interpreted as guardians or representations of ancestors. Animals carved into the stones appear symbolic rather than decorative. Snakes, foxes, vultures, and scorpions dominate the reliefs, hinting at stories and beliefs that existed long before written mythology. One carving shows a vulture holding a human head, another displays a scorpion positioned beside geometric patterns. Researchers debate their meanings, but a common theory is that Göbekli Tepe was connected to death rituals, ancestor worship, or even early astronomical tracking. Some carvings appear to align with star constellations. Others seem to reflect seasonal migration patterns of animals. This has led to a controversial yet intriguing possibility that the builders possessed knowledge of the stars, seasons, and natural cycles far beyond what any nomadic group should have known. If Göbekli Tepe was indeed an early observatory used to track celestial events, then its builders were not simply hunter-gatherers. They were astronomers, myth-makers, and engineers. Still, the biggest revelation came not from what was found, but from what wasn't. There were no signs of everyday life, no homes, no hearths, no refuse pits, no water storage, nothing that suggested people lived at Göbekli Tepe. This meant something extraordinary. The site was intentionally remote, a pilgrimage center, not a village. People traveled from miles away to build it, to worship at it, and to bury it. And when they left, they carried their traditions with them, dispersing into the ancient world with memories of rituals shared on a sacred hill. But Göbekli Tepe's builders remain shrouded in mystery. Their sudden disappearance raises even more disturbing questions. Did they simply abandon the site and assimilate into emerging agricultural communities? Or was there a catastrophic event that forced them to vanish? Climate records show sharp shifts in temperature around 8200 BCE, an event known as the 8.2 kilo-year event, one of the most sudden climate changes of the last 100,000 years. For many, this timing is no coincidence. The climate event would have caused drought, resource scarcity, and mass migration. For a culture dependent on seasonal hunting and gathering, such a shift could have been devastating. It may have led the builders to abandon their sacred center, or driven them to bury it in an attempt to preserve their way of life. Others propose a more symbolic explanation. Some believe the burial of Göbekli Tepe was a ritual act, marking the end of an era. As agriculture began spreading across the region, old myths, old rituals, and old ways of life were fading. Perhaps the builders buried the temple not out of fear, but out of reverence, a way of closing a chapter in human history. Yet the enigma persists. How did a civilization that should have been primitive build something so advanced? Why did they choose this hill? What rituals took place there? What beliefs carved themselves into its stone? And why did these people, capable of creating the world's first monumental architecture, leave behind no trace of their identity? Göbekli Tepe stands as a monument to questions that remain unanswered, a testament to a people who seem to emerge from nowhere, build the impossible, and then disappear. But the mystery was far from solved. Excavations were revealing something even stranger. Stone pillars and carvings that hinted at catastrophic memories, celestial warnings, and myths far older than any known civilization. Something about the site suggested that its builders were not only commemorating their world, but warning about something they had witnessed. Echoes of a forgotten catastrophe. As excavations at Göbekli Tepe continued, the carvings on the pillars began to attract increasing attention. These were not random decorations, not simple depictions of wildlife encountered by prehistoric hunters. Instead, they seemed arranged with purpose, rich in symbolism, layered with meaning, and consistent across multiple stone circles. The narrative emerging from the stones hinted at something the builders wanted to immortalize, something they wanted future generations to remember, or perhaps something they wanted to warn them about. One particular pillar stood out, Pillar 43. Archaeologists call it the Vulture Stone, and it quickly became the centerpiece of Göbekli Tepe's growing mystery. On its surface, a large vulture is shown lifting a human head. Beneath it lies a scorpion, a strange orb in various abstract patterns. At first, scholars interpreted it as symbolic of death rituals, perhaps the ancient practice of sky burial, where bodies were left exposed for vultures to consume. But then, a group of researchers from the University of Edinburgh proposed something far more dramatic, that the carvings recorded a cosmic disaster. According to their analysis, the animals carved on Pillar 43 correspond to star constellations. The vulture aligns with Sagittarius, the scorpion aligns with Scorpius, and the strange orb-like symbol may represent a comet or celestial object entering Earth's sky. If this interpretation is correct, then Göbekli Tepe may not simply be a temple. It may be the world's oldest astronomical logbook. And what it appeared to record was terrifying. Around 10,900 BCE, just before Göbekli Tepe was built, the Earth experienced a sudden cooling event known as the Younger Dryas. Temperatures plummeted, megafauna went extinct, and human populations collapsed. Some scientists believe a fragmented comet impacted Earth at this time, triggering massive fires, climate shifts, and widespread destruction. The symbols on Pillar 43 may depict this event, a cosmic disaster witnessed by early humans and preserved in stone for nearly 12,000 years. If true, then the builders of Göbekli Tepe were not only astronomers and engineers, they were survivors of a catastrophe. This idea reframed everything. Suddenly, the site took on new meaning. Perhaps it wasn't built simply as a place of worship. Perhaps it was built as a memory, a monument to a world-ending event, a warning carved into stone long before writing existed. But the carvings held other mysteries as well. Across the pillars, animals appear in sequences that seem to tell stories. Foxes chasing birds, snakes slithering beneath boars, cranes flanking humanoid figures. Some appear to represent seasons, migrations, or mythological cycles. Others seem to overlap with stories later found in Mesopotamian, Sumerian, and even biblical traditions. It raises an extraordinary possibility that the myths of later civilizations, the flood stories, the sky gods, the creatures of chaos, may have originated here at this sacred hill. That Göbekli Tepe could be the birthplace of humanity's oldest myths. But the most disturbing discovery was still ahead. One of the uncovered pillars displayed a humanoid figure unlike any other. It had exaggerated arms, long fingers, and what appeared to be a belt. Some researchers interpreted it as a depiction of an ancestor or shaman. Others saw it as something more symbolic, an entity representing death, chaos, or cosmic power. But a few suggested something far more unsettling, that the figure represented a being remembered by early humans from before the catastrophe, a being associated with knowledge, guidance, or control. This interpretation, though controversial, reflected a deeper truth about Göbekli Tepe. The site did not simply appear out of nowhere. The people who built it seemed to possess knowledge out of place for their time. Knowledge of engineering, knowledge of celestial events, knowledge of rituals and mythology that would define cultures for thousands of years. This led to a question scholars still debate. Did Göbekli Tepe mark the beginning of civilization or the end of an earlier one? Some archaeologists believe that knowledge from an older lost culture, sometimes called the proto-civilization hypothesis, was passed down to the hunter-gatherers who rebuilt society after the Younger Dryas catastrophe. These survivors may have preserved fragments of old teachings, how to carve stone, how to track the stars, how to build with purpose. If so, Göbekli Tepe may represent not the dawn of civilization, but the memory of a previous one. But even without speculative theories, the scientific evidence alone is clear. The builders of Göbekli Tepe remembered something significant, something large enough, terrifying enough, and world-changing enough to carve into stone. And they rebuilt their temple time and time again, perhaps to commemorate the cycles of nature or to track the skies for signs of another catastrophe. Yet even as researchers debated the meaning of the carvings, one question grew louder. Why bury the site so carefully? Why entomb something sacred? Why erase it from the world? The burial of Göbekli Tepe was not done in haste. It was deliberate, methodical, and ceremonial. Hundreds of tons of soil were packed around the pillars. Layer upon layer of sediment was added until the entire complex disappeared beneath the earth. This was not abandonment, it was preservation. Some believe the burial was an act of protection. If the builders feared another cosmic event or another upheaval, they may have concealed their sacred site to guard it from destruction. Others believe it was symbolic, a ritual marking the end of a belief system and the rise of a new one. As agriculture spread, as permanent settlements emerged, the old ways of nomadic life faded. Göbekli Tepe may have been buried as a final gesture of respect, a burial of the world that came before. But the most intriguing possibility is that the builders intended for Göbekli Tepe to be found in the distant future, that they buried it not to hide it, but to ensure it would outlast them. If this is true, then the people of Göbekli Tepe carved their warnings, their memories, and their myths into stone, not for themselves, but for us. The stones whispered a message across 12,000 years, and we are only now beginning to understand it. But the greatest mystery remained. What happened to the people who built it? The vanishing of the first builders. As the story of Göbekli Tepe reaches its final chapter, one question rises above all others. What became of the people who built it? They appeared suddenly in the archaeological record, constructed the earliest known monumental architecture in human history, carved a symbolic language older than any writing system, and then disappeared. No villages trace their legacy, no burials reveal their faces, no artifacts reveal their identity. They left behind a temple complex that challenged the foundations of archaeology, then stepped back into the shadows. To understand their disappearance, researchers began looking not at Göbekli Tepe itself, but at the world around it. The environment was changing. After the harsh Younger Dryas period ended, the climate began warming rapidly. Forests spread. Game animals migrated differently. Seasonal cycles shifted. The world that the builders had known was fading. Their rituals, their mythology, and their way of life existed in a fragile balance, and the land beneath their feet was transforming faster than their culture could adapt. Around 8200 BCE, a sudden and dramatic cooling event struck the region. Temperatures plummeted, rainfall patterns changed, lakes dried, rivers shrank. What had once been a fertile hunting territory became unpredictable and unstable. This climatic shock, lasting more than a century, would have placed enormous pressure on nomadic communities, already struggling with the transition from Ice Age ecosystems to a warming world. For many archaeologists, this is the moment when the story of Göbekli Tepe takes a decisive turn. With food shortages, unpredictable migrations, and dwindling resources, large gatherings may have become impossible. The rituals that once united the tribes under shared myth may have lost their place in a world demanding survival over ceremony. In this view, the people of Göbekli Tepe did not vanish instantly. Rather, they gradually fragmented, dispersing into smaller groups that adapted to local environments. But others believe the disappearance was more profound than simple migration. The sudden burial of the site suggests intention, care, purpose. It suggests a society aware that it was closing a chapter, not drifting away from it. These people did not abandon Göbekli Tepe in chaos. They buried it with ceremony, as if sealing away the memories of an age. One of the strongest theories proposes that, as agriculture began emerging in nearby regions, new ways of life replaced old traditions. The domestication of wheat, barley, goats, and sheep transformed human societies forever. With farming came permanent settlements. With settlements came new power structures, new belief systems, and new priorities. The nomadic groups who once gathered at Göbekli Tepe may have gradually integrated into these developing farming communities, their rituals fading into the past. If so, then the people of Göbekli Tepe did not vanish. They evolved. Their descendants may have carried fragments of their stories, their myths, and their sacred symbols into the world's earliest agricultural villages. Over generations, these fragments could have transformed into new mythologies, the gods and legends of Sumer, Mesopotamia, and beyond. Yet there is another, more haunting possibility. A possibility suggested by the carvings themselves. Some researchers believe Göbekli Tepe may have been constructed by a culture defined by its memory of catastrophe, a people who had survived a devastating event, whether cosmic, climatic, or both, and who built the site as a place to remember, to warn, or to reconnect with forces they believed shaped their world. If that is true, then their sudden disappearance may have been the result of another major disruption: drought, famine, disease, or conflict, a second catastrophe following the first. In this interpretation, Göbekli Tepe becomes not just a temple, but a monument to survival, a record carved in stone by a society determined not to let their knowledge die. A final message from a culture forged in adversity. If their disappearance was sudden, then the burial of the temple might have been an act of preservation, a way to protect their legacy from destruction or erasure. Yet even with these theories, one truth remains unavoidable. The builders of Göbekli Tepe left behind no identifiable descendants. Their language is unknown. Their social structure is invisible. Their beliefs exist only through the animals and symbols etched into stone. Everything else is silence. And still, the site itself continues to whisper clues. Some pillars show human figures without heads, possibly representing rituals of transformation or death. Others show animals arranged in patterns that may reflect mythological cycles. These motifs appear in later cultures too. In Sumerian flood myths, Mesopotamian sky deities, and ancient Near Eastern rituals, it is as though the stories of Göbekli Tepe resurfaced in pieces across the ancient world, distorted and reshaped by the civilizations that followed. This raises a profound question. Did Göbekli Tepe influence the birth of later religions? Did its symbols seed the myths that would define human culture for millennia? Many researchers believe so. The idea of a sacred gathering place, the emphasis on animals as cosmic symbols, the mythic struggle between chaos and order, these themes appear in ancient Sumer, in Babylon and Egypt, and even in early Indo-European cultures. While there is no direct proof, the similarities suggest that the echoes of Göbekli Tepe traveled far, carried by migrating tribes, preserved in stories and woven into new belief systems long after the original builders were gone. Yet despite this possibility, the people themselves remain a mystery. Perhaps that mystery is part of the story. Göbekli Tepe stands alone at the boundary between prehistory and civilization. It is a reminder that human history did not begin with simple tools and primitive survival. It began with ambition, with imagination, with the desire to build something meaningful in a world of uncertainty and danger. The people who carved the stones of Göbekli Tepe may never be known by name. Their culture may never be fully understood. But their legacy endures, not in the ruins they left behind, but in the questions they forced the world to ask. How old is human civilization? How advanced were our ancestors? What knowledge have we lost? And what stories were carved into stone so they would outlive time itself? Göbekli Tepe is more than an archaeological site. It is a message from the ancient world, a reminder that history is far older, far deeper, and far stranger than we ever imagined. And though the builders vanished, their stones remain, silent, unmoving, watching over the land they once called sacred. A monument not to what they were, but to what they chose to remember. In the end, their civilization did not disappear. It became legend,